Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Welcome to our Kabbalat Shabbat, Birmingham Temple Congregation for Humanistic Judaism service tonight from my home. I'm joined by my husband, Arthur Leafhaber, who's handling all of the tech to my right. And it's a pleasure to be with you all again, at least virtually, even if we can't still be together. It may be a while, so we're going to have to get used to this kind of format. But as I have said in my newsletter, and as it says on our website, we are physically apart, but humanistically together. So let's begin tonight with Hine Matov.
הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, ידעי דדדדדדדי. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, ידעי דדדדדדי. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, ידעי דדדדדדי. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד. הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.
We continue now as I ask Arthur to play our blessing and light our candles.
ברוך האור בעולם, ברוך האור באדם, ברוך האור בשלום, בשלום, ברוך האור, ברוך האור בשבת.
If you're holding a glass of cheer, some wine, please raise it with me as we wish each other l'chaim, to life. We continue with this first reading. Tonight we come together seeking once again to gain perspective on where we have been and where we are going. We may feel fragile. We may feel alone. Yet we remain connected as a community as we now come together in the only way that we can, reaching out to each other with our hearts. On this Shabbat, may we lengthen our perspective. May we find the space to consider and to challenge. May we find the courage to do what is right. Together we seek to find meaning, calm our anxieties, understand our purpose. May we find strength, and may we put it to work for ourselves and for others. Together we share the burden and blessing of responsibility. May we locate the will to change the things we can no longer accept. Together we are a community. May we strive to feel those bonds even when we are separated. Let us rejoice in the ties of community. Let us rejoice in our collective power. Let us rejoice in the gift of Shabbat. We continue with Eifo Ori.
Eifo Ori, Ori bi, Eifo tikvati, tikvati bi, Eifo kochi, kochi bi, vegam bach, vegam bach. איפה כוחי, כוחי בי, וגם בך, my strength is in me, and in you, and in you. Where is my strength? My strength is in me, and in you, and in you.
We continue with a reading now inspired by the V'ahavta section that follows the Shema from Deuteronomy. Our interpretation. May we strive to lead loving, compassionate lives with our hearts, with our wisdom, and with our actions. These are the ideas we inscribe in our innermost heart. May we practice them day and night, teaching them diligently to our children through our words, and especially through our deeds, so that the next generations learn to revere and to celebrate life. We continue with Mihaish.
Chafetz Chaim, Ohev Yamim, Lirot Tov, Mihaish, Chafetz Chaim, Ohev Yamim, Ohev
Tonight, I'm going to play for you a conversation that I had earlier this week, recorded for this service, with Mr. Kenneth Bob, who is the national president of the liberal or progressive Zionist organization known as Amenu, Our People, it translates as. Mr. Bob is also very active throughout the Jewish community nationally. He's a member of the Jewish Agency for Israel Board of Governors. He is a treasurer of the board of directors of J Street, and he is a board member of the Forward Association. That's the, of course, the National Jewish Now, again, daily online that I've spoken about before. Ken is a past chair of the Habonim Dror Foundation, which also sponsors Camp Tavor on the other side of Michigan from us, where many of our own BT kids have gone over previous summers, unfortunately, this not being one of them. He's a member of the National Alumni Association of the Labor Zionist Youth Movement, providing financial support for their educational programming throughout North America. Professionally, although that does sound like a professional portfolio, but that is his lay leadership. Professionally, Ken is an experienced entrepreneur and currently provides management consulting for small and emerging companies. I want to give a shout out to Howard Liederman, who suggested him as a guest, and I want to thank our member as well, Esther Ingber, who made the shidduch. So let us play for you now the interview that I did, or the conversation that I conducted earlier this week with Kenneth Bob from Amenu. Mr. Kenneth Bob, thank you so much for joining us tonight. Shabbat Shalom.
Shabbat Shalom.
I will have our folks know that we're pre-recorded here, so I will have already introduced you before we started this interview. So that gives us a little bit more time to talk about Amenu, which has a very active chapter here in metropolitan Detroit, including one of our beloved members, who Esther Ingber, has been very active, and I think is now currently the chairperson of that chapter. You and as Amenu and a few other groups, such as Americans for Peace Now, J Street, the Teruah Rabbinical Call for Human Rights, and so forth, you recently ran on a slate for the World Zionist Congress, which is a part of the World Zionist Organization going all the way back to 1897 in Theodor Herzl, as the Hatikva slate. Can you tell us a little bit about what the results were and what you think that signals to the American Jewish population, or to the World Zionist movement?
So there's a couple of different, I think, observations I can share as a result of the election. So as you said, we put together, I think, a very successful progressive Zionist entity, including 10 different organizations, Zionist youth movements, including Habonim Dror, all the groups you mentioned and others, to try to present a sort of hopeful message to American Jews that there's a way to identify with Israel and maintain progressive values. And actually, compared to the election 5 years ago, we raised our vote total by 250%. So from that perspective, it was successful. And we also actually raised the number of delegates that we will receive to attend the next Zionist Congress. It was supposed to be held in October. It's now going to be delayed due to the pandemic. We also raised the number of our delegates. However, that's one of the positive outcomes. The not so positive outcome is that the religious streams that we tend to ally with, the Reform and Conservative and Reconstructionist movements, all did not do as well. While they got more votes than they did in 2015, they didn't increase their votes in pace with the overall rise in voting, which I'll get to in a moment. So actually, our allies in the Reform and Conservative movement both lost delegates. Mm-hmm. Why was that? Because the Orthodox showed up in very significant numbers. In addition to the modern Orthodox list, what we call the Mizrahi list, or the Religious Zionists of America, who held their own, there was a new entry into the election, which was the ultra-Orthodox groups. They had never participated before in the election, and they decided that they wanted to be at this table, which was an unusual phenomena. And as we know, what is interesting about that community is that they do listen to their rabbis. And when their rabbi said, this is something you should go and vote, they came out of the box and finished very significantly higher than anyone thought. So the overall result, I would say, is that our progressive Zionist list did well, our religious colleagues did less well, and so the next American delegation of the Zionist Congress, whenever it's held, will lean more to the right and the Orthodox than the previous. Mm.
Does this, you think, in some ways parallel what's going on in Israel with what some have called the demise of the left there?
I think I'd be careful to draw too many direct lines between the U.S. and Israel, because actually, as we know, American Jews are largely liberal. And so the fact that they didn't vote in this election probably speaks to their lack of identification with Israel as much as anything else. You know, they'd said, why should I vote in an election that has to do with the Zionist Congress, which, as you referenced, started in 1897 by Herzl? What's the relevance today? So I think a lot of the American, our potential voters, the liberal Jews, just didn't think this was interesting. If you live in Israel, everything has to be interesting because you live there. So I think there's other factors at play in Israel. I think, yes, I think the left certainly has suffered. And many people actually, when they analyze this, say, well, the problem is that the left in Israel has focused so much on the peace issue over the years that, and that peace issue has been very problematic going back to 2000 and the demise of the Camp David negotiations between Barak and Arafat, is that Israelis became incredibly cynical about any possible peace opportunity. So if you ally yourself with something that people are cynical about, it's going to be hard to raise a lot of interest. And there are people who feel that, you know, maybe the left in Israel needs to actually focus more on bread and butter issues, on social issues. There's an incredible turmoil within the left, and it's resulted in a very, very challenging political situation. So I think the analysis is right that the left is in trouble, I think it has to, refine itself in a way. And I'll just add one more word. I think the big topic in Israel right now on the left is how to develop a better Jewish-Arab partnership. The Zionist parties, and here I'll put both Meretz and Labor in that category, have been very, very hesitant to actually say, you know what, this is a new Israeli left, and we need to reach out to the more moderate Arab voices who want to work with Jews and really create a Jewish-Arab left. Evidence of that was at a rally, an anti-annexation rally that took place in Tel Aviv on a recent Saturday night that was sponsored by Meretz and Hadash, which is largely an Arab party. And there, you could really feel what an Arab-Jewish left might look like in the Rabin Square in Tel Aviv.
It's interesting that there's always this talk about the non-Zionist parties in Israel not being part of the national conversation, which is code for the Arab parties, where we see, as we've now seen with the World Zionist Organization and the Congress votes, the ultra-Orthodox, who are also non-Zionists, are somehow always exempted from that. But to return to the topic then of annexation, this has become a big concern, obviously, on the Israeli left, but also for many in America, both those within the American Jewish community who consider them Zionists or not Zionists. And we have people of all stripes now in our own congregation, but all of us seem to be very concerned with the future of the Israel-Palestinian situation with this annexation vote. Can you talk a little bit about what's at stake here?
What's at stake potentially is Israel is a Jewish democratic state. And I think you alluded to it as well, Israel-diaspora relations. But I think the bigger overarching issue that people in America maybe don't focus on as much is the security issue for Israel. There are the security establishment, I would call the retired security establishment in Israel, is largely opposed to annexation. I've heard some of them speak on various webinars here in the United States over the last few weeks, and they talk about what the cost to Israel might be if this annexation goes through and thus impacts the relationship with Jordan. The security relationship with Jordan is so critical. The cost of damage to that relationship could be enormous in both money and in Israeli soldiers' lives. So the security issue is huge. Some people say that the biggest impact on the internal discussion in Israel now around annexation is actually an op-ed by a UAE, the Emirates ambassador. He had an op-ed on the front page of the Israeli daily paper, Yediot Ahronot, last week, where he said, doing this will harm your relationship with us and other Arab countries. And if Israel's one existential threat is Iran, then to damage relationships with other Arab countries in the Gulf is lunacy. So I think actually the security argument is starting to impact the conversation in Israel. And if you follow the press, two things are important to remember on this topic. One, all of a sudden, you have multiple different annexation plans coming out of government sources. Everything from the full Trump plan down to some symbolic annexation of some Jewish communities very close to the Green Line. And those have actually very different impacts on some of the issues we're talking about. And the last thing I'll mention is that the White House is holding internal talks this week to decide what the Trump administration is actually going to tell Netanyahu. Because of those who don't follow this closely, it's important to know that Netanyahu has said in writing to his coalition partners, he will only proceed with a plan that has full backing of the White House. So if there isn't full backing of the White House for a bigger annexation plan, he may be looking for something more modest.
We're participating as a co-sponsor of an event sponsored by If Not Now this Monday night, a workshop to look at the implications of annexation, just to mention for our congregants and others who are watching.
Wonderful.
To turn our attention a minute to some of the human rights issues. Certainly Israel annexation has a lot of those that you focused on. Security. Closer to home, we have our own human rights issues, particularly with the increased awareness of the systemic racism in this country. And many Jewish organizations in the progressive camp have been very strong supporters of Black Lives Matter. Those who were a little bit more hesitant, I think, have seen the need to get on that. Our congregation has been very strong in this area for a long time. But not everybody sees it the same way. So I wanted to raise the issue of one Morton Klein, who is the president of the Zionist Organization of America, which in its time when it was founded was Louis Brandeis's group, and so it's been transformed. Let's say they're one of the, I believe, founding members of the Conference of Presidents of Major American Jewish Organizations, and he tweeted recently that Black Lives Matter, he said, is a Jew-hating, white-hating, Israel-hating, conservative, black-hating, violence-promoting, dangerous Soros-funded extremist group of haters, a radical group that hates blacks who don't agree with them and hates the Jewish state. And he therefore condemned Black Lives Matter. On the strength of this and some other things, some shenanigans with the appointment of a new president who represents HIAS, the Hebrew Society, an organization is dear to our congregation's hearts. You have taken a leadership stance as one of the smallest organizations in this sea of presidents. Can you tell us a little bit what you've done and what results it's had or what you hope to have?
Amenu is indeed a small organization compared to the Reform movement, the conservative movement, National Council of Jewish Women. So we know that. However, again, one of the strengths of Amenu, and I guess serving as their president, I view this as a leverage point, is that we are part of these clubs. We're part of the Conference of Presidents. We're part of the American Zionist movement. And this gives us, I think, not only an opportunity, but an obligation to take leadership on some of these issues. And when I saw Mort Klein's hateful tweets that you quoted, I felt that it could not remain unanswered. But just Amenu answering it, we're not going to get the play, if you will, in the press and in the media that it deserves. And so I reached out to some of my colleagues within the Conference of Presidents and said, you know, this is a member of our club, and we have a moral obligation to condemn this. And I started talking to some of the other members, including some that I just mentioned, some of the larger organizations, and they agreed. And so over the course of about 48 hours a week ago, we put together I put together a letter that I then solicited people to sign, and we got 16 organizations to sign on to the letter. And we put out publicly. The forward covered it, and I can share it with you so you can share it with your congregants if you like. And it really spoke to the depth of our despair almost, that he's allowed, with the name of an organization, as you said, Zionist Organization of America, with its storied history, he's hijacked it to basically represent it as a voice of Jews. And we just feel it doesn't speak for the Jewish community. And frankly, it's damaging. Embarrassing would be one thing, but it's damaging if people in the broader community, and especially in the Black community, view that as representing a Jewish voice. And we thought it's very, very important to understand that Black Lives Matter is an important concept for us, and we need to be in full alliance at a time like this.
Do you think there will be any consequences for Klein or for the ZOA?
So that's a complicated question. I know we have limited time. There's a whole process within the conference of how you censor people and how you can even ultimately kick someone out. It's a long process. It's a high bar. So right now we're working through the complaint process and the censure process. He's already been censured once in recent history. So we're going now for the second time, which then of course is a more serious offense. But we're just not going to be quiet on this, because it's very important that Jewish community take responsibility.
Thank you. And I want to personally thank you for your leadership on this. It's one of the many reasons this is an honor to have this opportunity to spend this time with you. Perhaps someday you'll be able to come visit us in person as well. I know that you have some connections to Michigan. You mentioned earlier that you were a Camp Tavor alum. That's where, as I told you, our congregants frequently send their kids to the other side of the mitten. So I hope someday we'll be able to meet you in person. Thank you for all that you've done in the leadership that you've provided. Particularly, I think that this was, you may be small, but I think your voice has been very, very loud and a critical moral voice for the Jewish community within the conference. And and I thank you for that. Shabbat Shalom, and again, I hope we have the opportunity to meet again someday.
I'd love to come visit you in person someday, and Shabbat Shalom to everyone.
Thank you. So once again, thanks to the congregants who recommended and helped me to secure that conversation with Mr. Bob. I do want to reiterate that on Monday night, you'd have to check our newsletter, but I believe it's at 7 p.m. Our local chapter, If Not Now, will be joining the Birmingham Temple Congregation for Humanistic Judaism, the Ben Peace team, to discuss annexation, a workshop on this. We talked about, or Mr. Bob talked about, more the security concerns. For many of us, this is also a crucial human rights issue, and to look at what the consequences of annexation as it is being presented by Netanyahu. I think it requires us to spend some time digging deep into what's being proposed. So our congregation and all of you out there have access to our newsletter, which you can always find at birminghamtemple.com, big red button sitting there. You are welcome as well, too. This being an evening that we're thinking about peace issues, we'll continue now with a reading for peace. Isaiah prophesied, "They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore." The poet Yehuda Amichai wrote, "Don't stop after beating the swords into plowshares. Don't stop. Go on beating and make musical instruments out of them. Whoever wants to make war again will have to turn them into plowshares first." We continue with Naaseh Shalom.
Naaseh shalom, shalom ba'olam. Naaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom. Naaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom. Naaseh shalom, shalom ha'olam. Naaseh shalom aleinu ve'al kol ha'olam ve'imru shalom.
In this community, where we find strength and common purpose, we turn our minds and hearts toward all those who need our love and support, those who are ill, those who suffer pain of the body or spirit, those who are lonely, those who have been wronged. Tonight, we turn our well wishes and offer them to, we turn to our well wishes and offer them to these members of our community and their loved ones, to Cece Stone, Joan Mann, Patty Becker, Julia Eliason, Arlene Goldberg, Titus Mendel, Karen Tremper Harris, Robert Liebhaber, Larry Fisher, Jennifer Breen, Anne-Marie Kurzniak, Greg Lowenthal, and Myron Tink. May all who suffer know that they are not alone. May they be healed quickly. May they experience a complete recovery, refuah shlema, the renewal of their bodies and the renewal of their spirits.
Mekom ha'koach betocheinu, Mekorot ha'bracha michevrotenu. May the source of strength that dwells so deep within us Help us find the courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say Shalom. Mekom hakoach betocheinu, Mekorot habracha michavrotenu. May those in need of healing know refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say Shalom.
Our thoughts now turn to those who are no longer with us, our own loved ones, those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every people and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, of life and death. We recall now our loved ones whom death has recently taken from us, those who died at this season in years past, and those whom we have taken into our hearts with our own. Tonight, we recall the art sites of Lucille Arking, Carol Bass, Grace Grunberg, William Ash, Rose E. Vidra, Tova Malinsky, Emil Haas, George Molnar, Ida Molnar, and Louis Skip Siegel. Yehi zichram livracha. May memories of these beloved people give us a sense of comfort as we go through life in their absence. Next week, we will be off. Arthur and I are taking a July 4th weekend staycation, and probably like a lot of you tuning in that evening to watch Hamilton on Disney. In the weeks to come, we will hear from our member, one of the really great scholars of our community, of our country, of our world, Professor Ron Aronson, Professor Emeritus of the History of Ideas at Wayne State University. We'll talk about his recent writing in Tikkun magazine, his recent column about hope and the pandemic and the societal changes and challenges that we're facing, from everything from the Black Lives Matter issues that have come to the fore to unemployment, you name it, all the things we're reading about, but he has, as always, a unique take. We'll also be hearing sometime, probably the week after, the week that we return, we'll hear from an expert on the move to defund the police, to demysticize that idea for us, to explain what that phrase means and what's behind the idea. So we look forward to that. And we wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom. We'll close now with this beautiful adaptation of a Debbie Friedman song called, which we call May We Know Peace.
May we know peace as we go on our way. May we be guided by love. May we be possessed of health and joy. May this be our future. Shalom. Shalom, shalom. May this be our future. Shalom. Shalom, shalom. May this be our future. Shalom. May we feel sheltered by the wings of peace. May we abide in safety and in love. May grace and compassion find their way to everyone. May this be our future. Shalom. Shalom, shalom. May this be our future. Shalom. Shalom, shalom.
Shabbat shalom, everybody, from our home to yours. Stay safe. We'll see you soon.